The ventilation shaft on sub-level 47 of Kael'thor Station hissed like a dying animal. Maya Reeves pressed her palm against the corroded panel, feeling the vibration of failing machinery thrumming through her fingertips. The metal was hot. Too hot. Another 3 hours and the entire atmospheric processor would cascade into failure, flooding this section with toxic fumes that would kill every living thing in the lower districts. Not that anyone upstairs would care. She wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her grease-stained sleeve and glanced at her diagnostic scanner. The readout flickered in the dim emergency lighting, casting her small frame in shadows. 26 years old, slight build, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many double shifts and not enough sleep. Her brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her maintenance jumpsuit, 2 sizes too large, hung on her like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. "Reeves, you still down there?" The voice crackled through her comm unit, sharp with irritation. Maya flinched at the sound of her supervisor's voice. "Yes, sir. The compressor assembly is completely shot. I need to replace the entire cooling matrix, but we don't have the parts in inventory. If I can just requisition—" "No requisitions." The supervisor's voice was flat, final. "Make it work with what you have. The Vorthai don't pay us to ask for more resources. They pay us to keep things running." The comm clicked off before she could respond. Maya stared at the dead unit in her hand, then at the failing machinery around her. Make it work with what you have. That had been the story of her entire life. Her parents had died when she was 12. A transport accident that the station authorities had ruled unfortunate but unavoidable. She'd been shuffled through 3 foster homes before aging out of the system at 16, then spent the next decade scraping by on the lowest rungs of station maintenance. The Vorthai Syndicate controlled Kael'thor Station the way a parasite controlled its host, extracting every ounce of value while giving nothing back. They owned the docking bays, the commerce sectors, the entertainment districts. They controlled the flow of goods, the distribution of food, the very air that people breathed. And at the bottom of their empire, invisible and forgotten, were people like Maya, people who kept the station running while the powerful aliens above never bothered to learn their names. She turned back to the failing compressor and began the painstaking work of jury-rigging a solution. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, stripping parts from less critical systems, rerouting power flows, bypassing safety protocols that were supposed to protect the equipment but would have to be sacrificed to protect the people. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't safe, but it would buy them another few weeks, maybe. 2 hours later, covered in grease and burn marks from hot metal, Maya finally coaxed the atmospheric processor back to life. The hissing stopped. The temperature dropped. The lights flickered from red back to amber. She allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. Not pride exactly, but the quiet relief of having prevented a disaster that no one would ever know had been looming. She gathered her tools and made her way through the maintenance corridors toward the service elevator. Sub-level 47 was a maze of narrow passages, exposed piping, and flickering lights. The walls were stained with decades of neglect, and the air smelled of recycled oxygen and industrial lubricant. This was where the humans lived, the ones who weren't valuable enough for the upper levels, the janitors, the technicians, the dock workers, the invisible people. Maya had just reached the elevator when she heard voices echoing down the corridor. She froze, her heart suddenly hammering in her chest. Voices down here meant trouble. The maintenance levels were supposed to be empty except for the workers, and her shift had ended 20 minutes ago. She pressed herself against the wall and peered around the corner. 3 Vorthai enforcers stood in the corridor, their massive forms filling the narrow space. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, with powerful digitigrade legs, 4 arms, and skin that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, blue and violet markings that pulsed with their breathing. Their heads were elongated, almost serpentine, with multiple eyes arranged in a geometric pattern across their faces. They wore the black and crimson armor of Syndicate enforcers, and each carried plasma rifles that could vaporize a human in seconds. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Vorthai enforcers never came to the lower levels. Never. Their presence here could only mean one thing. Something important was happening. Something that involved the Syndicate's highest ranks. "Sweep should have been completed an hour ago," one of the enforcers was saying, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the walls. "The Sire's transport arrives in 90 minutes. Lord Kazith wants every level secured before then." The Sire. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She'd heard whispers about the Sire. Everyone who worked on Kael'thor Station had heard the whispers. He was the father of Lord Kazith Velnaru, the brutal crime lord who controlled the Vortai Syndicate with an iron fist. But the Sire was more than just a parent. He was a living legend, a figure from the old empire, a being who had walked among the stars when the Vortai were still a unified civilization instead of fractured criminal enterprises. No one had seen the Sire in decades. His existence had become almost mythical, a story that enforcers told to remind each other of their heritage, a name that even Lord Kazith spoke with something resembling reverence. And he was coming here, to Kael'thor Station, to this forgotten outpost on the edge of civilized space. "What about the maintenance workers?" another enforcer asked. "Clear them out. No human witnesses during the Sire's arrival. Lord Kazith's orders." Maya's pulse thundered in her ears. She had to move. Now. If they found her here, they'd either throw her in a holding cell or simply shoot her and claim she'd been trespassing in a restricted area. Either way, her life would be over. She turned and began moving as quietly as possible back the way she'd come, but her boot caught on a piece of exposed piping. The clang of metal on metal echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. "There!" one of the enforcers shouted. Maya ran. Her small size was an advantage in the cramped maintenance corridors. She darted through passages that the massive Vortai would have to squeeze through, vaulted over broken grating, ducked under hanging cables. Behind her, she could hear the enforcers trying to follow, their armor scraping against the walls, their frustrated snarls echoing through the tunnels. She burst out of the maintenance corridor and into one of the station's main service arteries, a wide passage that connected the lower levels to the commercial districts above. It was a risk being out in the open, but she needed to reach the worker dormitories where she could disappear into the crowds. Maya ran full tilt down the passage, her lungs burning, her legs screaming with effort. She could see the entrance to the dormitory section ahead, just 50 meters away. Safety, anonymity, survival. And then she slammed directly into something that felt like a wall of living stone. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs and sent her sprawling backward onto the deck. Her vision swam, and for a moment she thought she'd run into one of the station's support pillars. But pillars didn't move. Pillars didn't reach down with hands that could crush her skull like an eggshell. Maya looked up, and her heart stopped. The Vortai standing over her was unlike any she had ever seen. He was ancient. She could see it in the deep crystalline patterns that covered his skin, in the way his bioluminescence pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm that spoke of centuries of life. He stood at least 9 feet tall, and his forearms were decorated with intricate ceremonial bands that gleamed like starlight. His armor was not the black and crimson of the Syndicate, but deep purple inlaid with silver, the colors of old Vortai nobility from before the Empire had fallen. His eyes, 6 of them, arranged in 2 vertical rows, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel like an insect under a magnifying glass. This was the Sire. Behind him stood a full honor guard of elite Vortai warriors, and beyond them, emerging from a side corridor, was Lord Kazith Velnaru himself. The crime lord was massive even by Vortai standards, his black armor bristling with weapons, his face twisted in a permanent expression of cruel authority. His bioluminescent patterns pulsed blood red, and his eyes narrowed as he saw Maya sprawled on the deck in front of his father. "Remove this human," Lord Kazith growled. "Now!" 2 enforcers moved forward, plasma rifles raised. Maya's mind went blank with terror. This was it. She was going to die here, on the deck of a service corridor, because she'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, because she was nobody, because in the eyes of the Syndicate, human lives were worthless. And then, unbidden, a memory surfaced. Her grandmother, in the last days before the cancer took her, sitting in the tiny apartment they'd shared, teaching Maya words in a language that no one else spoke anymore. "These words are older than the stars, child. They come from a time when humans walked among the great civilizations as equals. Never forget them. Never let them die." Maya had been 7 years old. She hadn't understood why her grandmother was so insistent, so desperate to pass on this dead language, but she'd learned it anyway, memorizing the strange sounds, the complex grammar, the poetic phrases that seemed to carry weight beyond their meaning. She'd never had reason to use those words, not once in 19 years. Until now. As the enforcers reached for her, Maya looked up at the ancient Vortai towering above her and spoke in a voice that trembled but did not break. "Shaldara Nethys Vokthalan, Elder of Stars. This one begs forgiveness for her clumsiness in your presence." The words came out in Old Vortai, the ceremonial tongue of the ancient empire, the language that had been dead for 300 years. The effect was instantaneous. Every Vortai in the corridor froze. The enforcers lowered their weapons. The honor guard took a step back, their eyes wide with shock, and Lord Kazith's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then something that looked almost like fear. But it was the Sire's reaction that mattered most. The ancient Vorthai stood utterly still for a long moment, his 6 eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that made her want to sink through the deck plating and disappear. Then slowly, he tilted his head in a gesture of profound respect. When he spoke, his voice was like distant thunder, deep, resonant, and filled with an emotion that Maya couldn't identify. "You speak the old tongue." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of impossible fact. Maya swallowed hard, her throat dry. My grandmother taught me, honored elder. She learned it from the archives, from the old records. She said the words should not be allowed to die. The Sire was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that no one in the corridor could have predicted. He knelt. The movement sent shockwaves through the assembled Vorthai. An elder of stars, a being of the highest caste, a living connection to the ancient empire, did not kneel to anyone, especially not to a human maintenance worker covered in grease and wearing a jumpsuit 2 sizes too large. But he knelt nonetheless, bringing his massive frame down until his eyes were level with Maya's. "What is your name, child?" he asked in Old Vorthai. Maya's voice shook. "Maya Reeves, honored elder." "Maya Reeves." He repeated her name as if tasting it, testing its weight. "You honor the memory of what was lost. You carry words that my own people have forgotten. You show respect when you had every reason to show only fear." He reached out with one massive hand and gently helped her to her feet, his touch impossibly careful for a being of such power. Then he turned to face his son. Lord Kazith stood frozen, his expression unreadable. The crime lord who ruled the station through fear and violence looked, for the first time in his life, uncertain. The Sire spoke, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "This human will accompany us to the receiving hall. She will be treated as an honored guest. Anyone who harms her will answer to me personally." Lord Kazith's bioluminescent patterns flared red, then dimmed to a subdued violet. "Father, she is a maintenance worker, a nobody. This is highly irregular." The Sire's eyes narrowed. "She speaks the words that you have forgotten, my son. She remembers what you have abandoned. She shows more nobility in her fear than your syndicate has shown in a decade of rule." The rebuke hung in the air like a blade. Lord Kazith bowed his head. "As you wish, father." The Sire turned back to Maya, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his ancient features. "Come, child, we have much to discuss." And with that, the shy technician from sublevel 47, the girl who had spent her entire life being invisible, being nobody, was escorted through the corridors of Kael'thor Station by an honor guard of elite Vorthai warriors, walking beside an elder of stars while the most powerful crime lord in the sector followed 3 steps behind. The entire syndicate was about to learn a lesson that they had forgotten long ago, that true nobility was not measured in power or violence, but in the simple act of remembering what should never be forgotten. And Maya Reeves, with her grandmother's words on her lips and terror in her heart, had just become the most dangerous person on the station. She just didn't know it yet. The journey through Kael'thor Station was a blur of corridors that Maya had never seen before. The maintenance tunnels and service passages she knew so well gave way to polished floors and walls that gleamed with embedded lighting. The air itself changed, no longer the stale, recycled atmosphere of the lower levels, but crisp and clean, scented with something floral that must have cost more than she earned in a year. Maya walked in the center of the procession, flanked by the Sire on her right and 2 of his honor guard on her left. Behind them came Lord Kazith and his enforcers, their heavy footfalls echoing through the passages. Other Vorthai, merchants, bureaucrats, lower-tier syndicate members, pressed themselves against the walls as the procession passed, their eyes wide with shock at the sight of a human being escorted like visiting nobility. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together to hide the tremor, but the Sire noticed anyway. He glanced down at her, his ancient eyes unreadable. "You are afraid," he said in Old Vorthai, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear. Maya swallowed hard. "Yes, honored elder. I am terrified. That is wisdom, not weakness." The Sire's bioluminescent patterns pulsed with a soft blue light, a color that Maya's grandmother had told her meant approval, though she'd never expected to see it directed at her. "But understand this, child. You are under my protection now. No harm will come to you while you walk at my side. I do not understand why you honor me so, Elder. I am nobody, just a technician who fixes broken machines." The sire was silent for several steps. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of profound sadness. "Do you know why the old tongue died, Maya Reeves?" She shook her head. "Pride. Arrogance. When the empire fell and we scattered among the stars, my people decided that our past was a weakness. We convinced ourselves that tradition made us vulnerable, that remembering our history made us soft. So we abandoned the old ways. We stopped teaching the ceremonial language. We forgot the wisdom of our ancestors in favor of the immediate gratification of power and wealth." He gestured ahead with one of his forearms, indicating the gleaming corridors around them. "My son built an empire of crime. He controls trade routes, smuggling operations, protection rackets. He has wealth beyond measure and power that spans a dozen systems, but he has lost something far more valuable. He has forgotten who we were, who we are meant to be." The sire looked down at her again, and Maya saw something in his eyes that she hadn't expected. Respect. "You are a human maintenance worker from the lowest levels of a forgotten station. You have no wealth, no power, no status, and yet you remember. You carry words that my own people have abandoned. Your grandmother gave you a gift more precious than all the credits in my son's vaults. She gave you memory. She gave you the knowledge that some things should never be forgotten, no matter how the universe changes around us." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. Her grandmother had died when she was 14, alone in a hospice ward that smelled of disinfectant and death. Maya had been the only one at the funeral, the only one who'd cared that a fragile old woman who spoke in dead languages had slipped away from the world. "She would have been honored to meet you, Elder," Maya whispered. "And I would have been honored to meet her," the sire replied, "for she clearly understood what my son has forgotten, that civilization is not built on power, but on memory, on respect for what came before, on the simple courage to preserve beauty in a universe that seeks to destroy it." They reached a massive set of doors, polished chrome inlaid with precious metals, standing at least 20 feet tall. 2 honor guards moved forward and pushed them open, revealing the receiving hall beyond. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The hall was enormous, easily 200 feet across and 50 feet high. The walls were decorated with holographic displays showing star systems, trade routes, and corporate holdings, a visual representation of the Syndicate's vast criminal empire. The floor was black marble shot through with veins of gold, and the ceiling was a transparent dome that showed the stars beyond the station. But it was the assembled crowd that made Maya's stomach drop. Hundreds of Vortai filled the hall. Syndicate captains, crime lords from allied organizations, wealthy merchants, and political figures from a dozen worlds. They wore elaborate armor and flowing robes, their bodies decorated with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in complex rhythms. The combined glow of so many Vortai turned the hall into a sea of living light, and every single one of them turned to stare as Maya walked in. The whispers started immediately, a rustling susurrus that filled the hall like wind through leaves. A human, in the receiving hall, walking beside the sire himself. Impossible, unthinkable, against every protocol, every tradition, every rule that governed Syndicate society. Lord Kazith moved forward, his massive frame radiating tension. He raised one of his forearms and the hall fell silent. "We are gathered today to welcome my father, the honored Sire Velnaru, who returns to us after many years of contemplation." His voice was formal, controlled, but Maya could hear the undercurrent of anger beneath the words. "We are honored by his presence and by the wisdom he brings." The sire stepped forward, and the change in the room was palpable. Every Vorthai in the hall straightened, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to respectful blue and violet. Some of the older ones, those who remembered the empire before it fell, actually lowered their heads in reverence. "I have returned," the sire said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the vast space, "because I received troubling reports about the state of my son's organization, reports that the Vorthai Syndicate has lost its way, that it has become nothing more than brutality dressed in the stolen clothes of nobility." Lord Kazith's patterns flared red. "Father, I have built an empire. You have built a criminal enterprise." The sire's voice was calm, but it cut like a blade. "There is a difference. Our ancestors built their power on honor, on mutual respect, on the understanding that true strength comes not from fear, but from the willing loyalty of those who follow. You rule through terror and violence. You extract wealth from the weak and call it prosperity. You have forgotten every lesson that our civilization learned in 5,000 years of history. The hall was deathly silent. No one dared to speak. No one even dared to breathe loudly. The sire gestured to Maya, who stood frozen beside him, acutely aware that several hundred pairs of alien eyes were now focused on her. This human, a maintenance worker from the lowest levels of this station, a person so insignificant that none of you even know her name, spoke to me in the old tongue. She showed me respect that none of you have shown in decades. She remembers what all of you have forgotten. He turned to face the assembled crowd, his ancient eyes sweeping across them like searchlights. How many of you can speak even one sentence in the language of our ancestors? How many of you know the ceremonial forms, the proper modes of address, the poetry and wisdom that defined our civilization? The silence was answer enough. None, the sire said softly. Not one. You have become so enamored with your wealth and power that you have abandoned the very foundation upon which that power was built. You are Vorthai without history, warriors without honor, leaders without wisdom. Lord Kazith stepped forward, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Father, with respect, we are not living in the old empire. The universe has changed. To survive, we must adapt. We must be strong. You must remember, the sire interrupted. Strength without wisdom is brutality. Power without honor is tyranny. Wealth without compassion is cruelty. He looked back at Maya. This human understands something that you have forgotten, that some things are worth preserving even when the world tells you they are useless. That memory itself is a form of strength. That kindness in the face of fear is the truest form of courage. A Vorthai near the front of the crowd, an older female with deep purple patterns and ceremonial robes, spoke up, her voice hesitant. Honored sire, what would you have us do? How can we reclaim what has been lost? The sire was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he turned to Maya and spoke in Old Vorthai, his voice gentle. Child, would you be willing to teach my people what your grandmother taught you? To help them remember the words they have forgotten? Maya's mind went blank with shock. Teach? Her? She could barely string 2 words together in normal conversation without stammering. She spent her days elbow-deep in machinery, not standing in front of crowds. The thought of teaching these powerful, terrifying aliens anything was so absurd that she almost laughed. But then she remembered her grandmother's voice, weak with illness, but fierce with determination. Never let them die, Maya. Never let the words die. She took a shaking breath and answered in Old Vorthai, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow carrying in the silent hall. I am not worthy to teach such honored beings, Elder, but if it would preserve my grandmother's memory, if it would honor her gift, then I will try. The sire's patterns glowed with brilliant blue light, the color of profound satisfaction. He turned back to the assembled crowd and spoke in Standard, the common language that all species used for trade and diplomacy. You have your answer. This human, who has every reason to fear and hate you, will teach you the language that you abandoned. She will help you remember what you have lost, and in return, you will treat her with the respect that her courage and her grandmother's wisdom deserve. He fixed Lord Kazith with a hard stare. My son, I am ashamed of what you have built here. You rule through fear, extract wealth through extortion, and show no mercy to those weaker than yourself. This ends now. While I remain on this station, there will be changes. The humans in the lower levels will receive fair wages for their work. They will have proper living conditions. They will be treated as sentient beings with value, not as disposable tools. Lord Kazith's entire body went rigid. Father, you cannot simply... I can, and I will. The sire's voice held absolute finality. You forget that I am not merely your father. I am an elder of stars. My word carries weight in the old families, in the corporations, in the political structures that predate your syndicate by centuries. If you refuse my directions, I will use that weight to dismantle everything you have built. I will call in debts, break alliances, and ensure that the name Velnaru becomes synonymous with dishonor. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Lord Kazith stood frozen, his patterns shifting through a dozen colors. Rage, shame, calculation, fear. Finally, they settled on a dull violet. Submission. As you command, Father. The sire turned back to Maya. Come, child. You must be hungry, and you look ready to collapse from fear. We will find you quarters suitable for a language teacher, and you will rest. Tomorrow, we begin the work of reclaiming what was lost. Maya could barely process what was happening. One moment she'd been running from enforcers in a maintenance tunnel. Now she was being given quarters, quarters, and being called a language teacher by an ancient alien who had just threatened to dismantle a criminal empire to protect her. As the sire led her toward a side exit, she heard the whispers start up again behind them. But now they were different, not mocking or dismissive, but awed, uncertain. A human had somehow become central to the most powerful Vortai in the sector. A maintenance worker had gained the protection of an elder of stars. The universe had just shifted on its axis, and no one was quite sure where they stood anymore, including Maya herself. The quarters they gave her were larger than the apartment she'd shared with her grandmother, larger than any space she'd ever called her own. The walls were a soft cream color, the floor covered in something that felt like carpet, but shimmered with embedded lighting. There was a bed, an actual bed with pillows and blankets, not the thin mattress she was used to, and a bathroom with running water that was actually hot. Maya stood in the center of the room, still wearing her grease-stained jumpsuit, and tried not to cry. A soft chime came from the door. She wiped her eyes quickly and called out, "Come in." The door slid open, and a young Vorthai female entered, carrying a bundle of fabric. She was smaller than most Vorthai, only about 7 feet tall, and her patterns were a gentle turquoise. She bowed her head respectfully. "The honored sire sent me to provide you with clothing and food," she said in standard, her voice soft. "My name is Sire. I will be assisting you during your stay." Maya blinked. "Assisting me? I don't need—" "Please," Sire interrupted gently. "The sire has commanded that you be treated as an honored guest. To refuse would dishonor him." She set the bundle on the bed and looked at Maya with something that might have been curiosity. "Is it true that you spoke the old tongue, that you know the ceremonial forms?" Maya nodded slowly. Shira's patterns brightened. "My grandmother, my birth mother's mother, she remembered some of the words. She used to sing them to me when I was young, but she died before she could teach me what they meant. She said they were important, that we should never forget." Something in the young Vorthai's voice made Maya's heart ache. She thought of her own grandmother, of the hours spent learning words that seemed useless, memorizing grammar that no one else would ever care about. "The words live in those who remember," Maya said softly in Old Vorthai. "And in remembering, we honor those who came before." Shira's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" Maya translated, and watched as tears, actual tears, though they glowed faintly with bioluminescence, formed in Shira's eyes. "That's beautiful," the young Vorthai whispered. "That's what my grandmother was trying to tell me. That's why she sang those words." "Then I'll teach you," Maya heard herself say. "If you want to learn, if you want to honor your grandmother's memory." Shira's patterns blazed with brilliant blue light, joy and gratitude mixed together. "Yes, please, I would be honored." As the young Vorthai helped her out of her filthy jumpsuit and into clothing that was clean and soft and fit properly for the first time in her adult life, Maya felt something shift inside her chest. The terror was still there. She was in way over her head, surrounded by aliens who could kill her without effort, caught in the middle of some kind of power struggle she didn't fully understand. But beneath the fear was something else. Something warm and fragile and almost painful in its intensity. Purpose. Her grandmother's words hadn't been useless after all. The hours of study, the memorization, the stubborn refusal to let a dead language die, it had all led to this moment, to the possibility that she might actually make a difference, that she might honor her grandmother's memory in a way that mattered. Maya Reeves, shy technician from Sublevel 47, had just become the unlikely bridge between a criminal empire and its forgotten past. And somewhere in the stars beyond the station, she liked to think that her grandmother was smiling. Maya woke to the soft chime of an alarm she hadn't set. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The bed was too comfortable, the air too clean, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back, and with it came a wave of anxiety so intense that she had to sit up and focus on breathing. She was supposed to teach today. Teach the old tongue to Vorthai Syndicate members who had probably never been told no in their entire lives. Teach a language that she'd learned from a dying woman in a cramped apartment that smelled of medicine and regret. What had she been thinking? The door chimed. Maya grabbed the robe that Shira had left for her, soft blue fabric that somehow adjusted to fit her small frame, and called out, "Come in." Shira entered carrying a tray of food. The young Vorthai's patterns were bright yellow, which Maya's grandmother had said meant excitement or anticipation. "Good morning, teacher," Shira said formally, bowing her head. Maya winced. "Please don't call me that. I'm just Maya." "The sire has declared you a language teacher," Shira said gently, setting the tray on a small table. To call you anything less would be disrespectful. Besides, her pattern shifted to softer blue. You promised to teach me. That makes you my teacher, whether you feel worthy of the title or not. Maya looked at the food, real food, not the nutrition paste she was used to, and felt her stomach twist with nerves. How many people are coming today? 23 have requested to attend the first session, Sire said. The Sire has reserved the small council chamber. It holds 30 comfortably. 23. Maya's vision swam. 23 Vorthai, all more powerful than her, all probably resentful that they were being forced to learn from a human, all watching her, judging her, waiting for her to fail. I can't do this, she whispered. Sire tilted her head, her 6 eyes focusing on Maya with surprising gentleness. May I tell you something, teacher? Something my grandmother told me before she died? Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. She said that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what must be done even when fear tells you to run. You spoke to the Sire yesterday when you could have remained silent. You agreed to teach when you could have refused. You are already braver than you think you are. Maya closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother. Not the frail woman in the hospice bed, but the fierce matriarch who had sat with her night after night, drilling words and phrases until they were carved into Maya's memory. Some things are worth preserving, child, even when the world tells you they're useless, especially then. She opened her eyes and looked at Sire. Will you help me? I don't know how to. I've never taught anyone before. Shire's patterns brightened. Of course. I'll be there beside you. And the Sire himself has said he will attend. No one will dare show you disrespect while he watches. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made Maya's anxiety spike even higher. The Sire would be watching her fumble through teaching a language she'd learned as a child. He would see every mistake, every moment of hesitation, every sign that she wasn't worthy of the respect he'd shown her. But she'd made a promise. To him, to Sire, to the memory of her grandmother. Maya stood up and squared her shoulders. Then I guess we'd better get started. The small council chamber was anything but small. The circular room was at least 50 feet across, with tiered seating that descended toward a central platform. Holographic displays covered the walls, currently showing the station's schematics, but they could obviously be changed to display anything needed for a presentation. Maya stood on the central platform and tried not to hyperventilate as the Vorthai filed in. They were all ages, all castes within the Syndicate. Some wore the armor of enforcers, others the flowing robes of administrators or merchants. Their bioluminescent patterns ranged from the deep purple of old families to the bright crimson of soldiers, but they all had one thing in common. They looked at her with expressions that ranged from skepticism to outright hostility. A human, teaching them. It was an insult, and they all knew it. Lord Kazith was the last to enter, his massive frame filling the doorway. His patterns were a dull red, suppressed anger. He took a seat in the highest tier, as far from the central platform as possible, and fixed Maya with a stare that promised nothing good. And then the Sire entered, and the entire atmosphere of the room changed. Every Vorthai stood as the ancient elder descended to the lowest tier, taking a seat directly in front of the platform where Maya stood. His patterns pulsed with calm blue light, and his eyes, all 6 of them, focused on her with an intensity that was somehow both terrifying and reassuring. Begin, child, he said in Old Vorthai. Show them what you carry. Maya's hands were shaking. She clasped them behind her back and took a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. I'm not a trained teacher, she began in standard, her voice barely steady. I'm not a linguist or a scholar. I'm someone whose grandmother believed that some things should never be forgotten. The old tongue was one of those things. She gestured, and Sire, standing near the platform controls, activated a holographic display. Words appeared in the air, written in the flowing script of ancient Vorthai. This is the basic greeting form. It translates roughly as, honor to your lineage and wisdom to your path. But that's not really what it means. The old tongue doesn't work like standard. Every word carries layers of meaning, context that has to be understood to truly speak it properly. One of the Vorthai in the middle tier, a male with military bearing and bright red patterns, made a dismissive gesture. This is absurd. The old language is dead for a reason. It's inefficient, overly complex, and serves no practical purpose in modern commerce. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but before she could respond, the Sire spoke. Captain Vexenal, perhaps you could demonstrate your efficiency by conducting a trade negotiation with the Keltharian Consortium without offending their cultural sensibilities? The captain's patterns flickered with uncertainty. Honored sire, the Keltharians are notoriously difficult. They are notoriously traditional, the sire interrupted. They value ceremony, respect for history, and proper forms of address. When we still remembered the old tongue, we had no trouble negotiating with them. Now we stumble through every interaction because we've forgotten that some species value more than mere efficiency. He looked back at Maya. Continue, child. Show them what efficiency has cost us. Maya swallowed hard and continued. She walked them through basic greetings, explaining the subtle variations based on relative status, age, and the nature of the relationship. She showed them how a single word could carry implications of respect, challenge, or intimacy depending on the tone and context. And slowly, something began to happen. The hostility in the room didn't disappear, but it began to shift. A few of the Vorthai, particularly the older ones, started leaning forward, their patterns brightening with interest. When Maya demonstrated the formal greeting that would be used between equals of noble houses, she saw several of them mouth the words along with her, testing the sounds. Sire helped, providing examples from her grandmother's songs and showing how the melody emphasized certain syllables. Together, they created something that wasn't quite a lecture and wasn't quite a conversation. Something that felt more like an excavation, digging up treasures that had been buried too long. After 2 hours, Maya called for a break. Her throat was raw from speaking, and her legs trembled from standing so long. Several of the Vorthai approached her as the others filed out, their expressions thoughtful. An older female with deep purple patterns bowed her head. Teacher, my name is Matriarch Shalira. I remember my mother speaking some of these words when I was very young. I thought I had forgotten them, but hearing you speak, it's like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. That's exactly what my grandmother said. That language isn't just words, it's memory. It's connection to those who came before. Shalira's patterns glowed with soft blue light. Your grandmother was wise. I would be honored to learn more. As the matriarch left, others approached. Not all of them. Several still looked skeptical or resentful, but enough that Maya began to feel something she hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe this could actually work. Maybe she could actually do this. And then Lord Kazith approached, and her hope curdled into fear. The crime lord descended from the upper tier with deliberate slowness, his forearms held in a posture that was just short of threatening. His patterns pulsed with suppressed red, anger held in check only by his father's presence. A pretty performance, he said in standard, his voice cold. But let us be clear about something human. My father may be impressed by your parlor trick, but I am not. You are here because he finds you amusing. The moment that amusement ends, so does your protection. Maya wanted to back away, but forced herself to stand still. I'm not trying to amuse anyone. I'm just trying to honor my grandmother's memory. Your grandmother. Kazith's patterns flared brighter. A dead human from a forgotten world. And for this, my father humiliates me in front of my own people. For this, he threatens to dismantle everything I've built. I never asked for any of this, Maya said, her voice shaking but determined. I was just trying to get to my dormitory. I didn't ask to meet the sire. I didn't ask to teach. I just spoke words that my grandmother taught me, and somehow that matters to him. It matters because he is old, Kazith snarled. Because he clings to a past that is dead and gone. He wants to believe that honor and tradition still mean something in this universe, but they don't. Power means something. Strength means something. Everything else is just pretty words that get you killed. The sire's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. Is that what you believe, my son? Kazith froze. The ancient Vorthai had approached so silently that neither of them had noticed. Now he stood beside Maya, his massive form radiating an authority that made even his son step back. Do you truly believe, the sire continued, that this human girl has no power? That her words mean nothing? He gestured around the chamber. You saw the faces of your people when she spoke. You saw them remember. You saw them hunger for something they didn't even know they were missing. They'll get over it, Kazith said, but his voice lacked conviction. Will they? The sire's patterns shifted to a color Maya hadn't seen before, a deep, burnished gold that seemed to carry infinite weight. Or will they begin to question why they follow you? Why they take orders from someone who has abandoned everything that made our people great? He stepped closer to his son, and his voice dropped to something that was almost gentle, almost sad. I do not do this to humiliate you, Kazith. I do this because you are my son, and I cannot watch you destroy yourself with your own arrogance. You have built an empire of fear and violence, and you believe that makes you strong. But empires built on fear are castles made of sand. One tide, one moment of weakness, and they collapse. And empires built on honor? Kazith's voice was bitter. Those collapsed 3 centuries ago when the old houses fell and the galaxy descended into chaos. They collapsed because we forgot what honor meant, the sire said quietly. Because we decided that tradition was weakness. Because we abandoned the wisdom of our ancestors in favor of immediate gain. He looked back at Maya. This human reminds us that some things are worth preserving even when the world tells us they're useless. She shows us that memory itself is a form of strength. Kazith's patterns flickered through a dozen colors. Rage, shame, confusion, fear. Finally, they settled on a dull violet. Do as you will, father, but do not expect me to pretend that this changes anything. He turned and left the chamber, his honor guard falling in behind him. The sire watched him go, his patterns dimming to a soft, sad blue. When he finally turned back to Maya, he looked older than he had before, tired. My son is not evil, child, he said in Old Vorthai. He is simply lost, and I fear that I may not have the time to help him find his way back. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so instead, she reached out, slowly, giving the ancient Vorthai time to pull away if he wanted, and gently touched one of his massive hands. Then we'll help him remember together, she said softly, one word at a time. The sire looked down at her small hand resting on his, and something in his expression shifted. The sadness didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, hope. Your grandmother raised you well, Maya Reeves. You honor her memory with every breath. As they left the council chamber together, Maya felt the weight of what she'd taken on settle more fully onto her shoulders. She wasn't just teaching a language, she was caught in the middle of a war between father and son, between past and present, between tradition and power. And somehow, the shy technician from sub-level 47 had become the fulcrum on which that war would balance. She just hoped she was strong enough to bear the weight. That evening, Sire brought her dinner and stayed to talk. The young Vorthai was practically vibrating with excitement, her patterns cycling through bright yellows and blues. Teacher, you should have heard what people are saying. Matriarch Shalira has already scheduled 3 private sessions with you. Captain Vexnal, the one who challenged you, he's been asking everyone if they remember any old words from their grandparents. And the merchants are talking about how this could help with the Keltharian negotiations. Maya picked at her food, exhaustion making it hard to eat despite her hunger. That's good. I'm glad people are interested. Interested? Shira's patterns brightened even more. Teacher, you've done something amazing. You've made people care about our history again. You've made them want to remember. I've also made Lord Kazith hate me, Maya said quietly. Shira's patterns dimmed slightly. Lord Kazith hates anyone who threatens his power, but the sire protects you. As long as he's here, you're safe. And when he leaves, the question hung in the air between them. Shira was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, then you'll need friends. People who remember what you've taught them. People who understand that what you carry is more valuable than all of Lord Kazith's credits. She reached out and gently touched Maya's hand, a gesture that Maya had learned was deeply significant for Vorthai, who rarely made physical contact outside their immediate families. You have at least one friend, teacher. I promise you that. Maya felt tears sting her eyes again. She'd spent so much of her life alone, invisible, forgotten. Now, in the strangest circumstances imaginable, she was building connections she'd never dreamed of. Thank you, Shira, she whispered, for everything. As the young Vorthai left, Maya stood by the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, her grandmother had lived and died believing that the words she'd taught Maya mattered, that preserving a dead language was worth the effort. Maya had doubted her, had wondered if the old woman was just clinging to the past out of stubbornness or senility. But now, standing in quarters she'd never thought she'd see, teaching aliens she'd been taught to fear, Maya understood. Her grandmother hadn't been preserving a language. She'd been preserving a lifeline, a connection between past and present, between power and wisdom, between what was lost and what could still be found. And Maya Reeves, shy technician turned unlikely teacher, would honor that gift with everything she had, even if it killed her. 3 weeks passed in a blur of teaching sessions, private lessons, and late nights spent preparing materials that Maya prayed were good enough. The initial class of 23 had grown to 47, then to 72. Word had spread beyond Kael'thor Station. Other Vorthai from neighboring systems began requesting remote access to the sessions, and twice Maya had been asked to record lessons for distribution across the Syndicate's networks. She was becoming famous, or infamous. She couldn't quite tell which. The Sire attended every public session, his presence a silent guarantee of her safety. But Maya could see the toll it was taking on him. The ancient Vorthai moved slower than he had 3 weeks ago, his bioluminescent patterns dimming at times, his breathing labored after climbing the station's levels. Whatever had brought him out of retirement wasn't just concern for his son's empire, it was something deeper, something urgent, something that was running out of time. Maya was reviewing notes for the next day's lesson when Sire burst into her quarters, her patterns flashing emergency red. "Teacher, you need to come quickly. There's been an incident in the lower levels." Maya's blood ran cold. What kind of incident? A human was injured. One of Lord Kazith's enforcers claimed he was trespassing in a restricted area. The Sire has gone down to investigate, but Shire's patterns flickered with fear. "Teacher, the enforcers are saying that the Sire's reforms have made them weak, that protecting humans is making the Syndicate vulnerable. There are rumors of dissent." Maya grabbed her jacket. She still kept some of her old maintenance clothes, unable to fully embrace the finer garments she'd been given, and followed Sire out the door. They took a service elevator down, descending through the station's levels. As they dropped lower, Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. These were her levels, her corridors, the places where she'd spent her entire life being invisible. Now she was returning as someone entirely different, and she had no idea if that was a good thing or a disaster waiting to happen. The incident had occurred on sub-level 38, in one of the storage districts where human workers sorted and cataloged cargo for the Syndicate's smuggling operations. A crowd had gathered, dozens of humans and nearly as many Vorthai enforcers, the two groups facing each other with the kind of tension that preceded violence. The Sire stood in the center, his massive frame radiating authority despite his obvious fatigue. At his feet lay a human man, his face bloodied, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. A human woman, presumably his wife, knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she tried to help him. Lord Kazith was there too, his patterns blazing crimson with barely suppressed rage. He stood with his honor guard, arms crossed, glaring at his father with an expression that promised this conflict was far from over. "He was in a restricted area," one of the enforcers was saying, his voice defensive. "I ordered him to leave. He refused. I used appropriate force." "Appropriate force," the Sire repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "You broke this man's arm and fractured his skull because he was standing in a corridor that you decided was restricted." "It was restricted," the enforcer insisted. "Lord Kazith's orders. No humans in the cargo bays without proper authorization." "And did this man know about these orders?" The Sire looked down at the injured human. "Did you tell him he was trespassing before you attacked him?" The woman looked up, her eyes red with crying. "He was just looking for his daughter. She works in Bay 7 and she didn't come home last night. He was worried about her. He didn't know about any new rules." Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. She pushed through the crowd until she could see the injured man clearly. His face was so swollen that she almost didn't recognize him, but something about his build, the gray in his hair. "Chen," she whispered. "Chen Zhao." The woman looked up sharply. "You know him? We worked together, 5 years ago, on the atmospheric processors." Maya knelt beside the woman, her hands shaking. "Where's his daughter? Where's Lynn?" "I don't know," the woman sobbed. "She didn't come home last night, and now they won't let me search the bays. They say it's restricted, that humans need special permission, but the permission office is closed and—" "She's in Bay 7, a young male voice called out from the crowd. A teenager pushed forward, his face pale. "I saw her. She's locked in one of the storage containers. One of the Vorthai overseers put her there yesterday as punishment for talking back. I tried to tell someone, but no one would listen." The crowd erupted. Humans shouting in outrage, enforcers raising weapons, chaos spreading like fire through dry grass. "Silence!" The Sire's voice cracked like thunder, and every being in the corridor froze. The ancient Vorthai turned to his son, and for the first time since Maya had met him, she saw pure fury in his eyes. "This is what your empire has become, Kazith. Children locked in cargo containers, workers beaten for trying to find their families, laws that change without notice, enforced with violence, justified with nothing but power." Lord Kazith's patterns flared even brighter. "They need to learn their place, Father. The humans work for us. They follow our rules. Without discipline, there is chaos. Without justice, there is tyranny." The sire gestured at Chen's broken form. This man has worked for your syndicate for how long? 17 years, the wife whispered. 17 years without a single complaint or violation. 17 years of loyal service, the sire said, his voice heavy with disgust. And this is how you repay him. This is the strength you're so proud of. This is the empire you've built. He turned to the crowd, his patterns shifting to the deep gold of formal proclamation. Hear me now, all of you. As an elder of stars, I invoke the old rights, the rights that predate the syndicate, that predate the fall of the empire, that stand upon 5,000 years of Vorthai law. I declare this human and his family under my personal protection. I declare that his daughter will be released immediately and without punishment. And I declare that the enforcer who beat him will face judgment under the old codes. The crowd went deathly silent. The old codes hadn't been invoked in centuries. They superseded all modern law, but only an elder of stars had the authority to call them, and only if they were willing to stake their personal honor on the outcome. Lord Kazith's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like fear. Father, you cannot be serious. The old codes are still law, the sire interrupted. Or have you abandoned even that? Have you become so drunk on power that you believe yourself above the traditions that gave birth to your authority? The crime lord looked around at the assembled crowd, at his enforcers watching with uncertain expressions, at the humans staring with something that might have been hope, at the other Vorthai present who were old enough to remember when the old codes still meant something. He was trapped. If he defied his father now, publicly, he would lose the support of the traditional families. The old guard who still remembered the empire would turn against him. His syndicate would fracture. But if he submitted, he would be seen as weak. His enforcers would question his authority. His enemies would sense vulnerability. As you command, father, he finally said, the words forced out through clenched teeth. The sire turned to Maya. Child, would you accompany me? I may need someone who speaks both standard and the language of compassion. Maya nodded and followed as the sire made his way toward Bay 7, the crowd parting before him like water. Behind them, she could hear Sire organizing a medical team for Chen and his wife, could hear the whispers spreading through the humans, hope mixed with disbelief, caution mixed with the first stirrings of courage. Bay 7 was a massive cargo storage facility, filled with containers stacked 3 stories high. The air smelled of metal and ozone, and the lighting was harsh and industrial. A Vorthai overseer stood near the entrance, his patterns going pale when he saw the sire approaching. The human girl, the sire said simply. Where is she? The overseer's patterns flickered through panic, calculation, and resigned defeat. Container 847 Delta, honored elder. But she was being punished for insubordination. She was locked in a box overnight because you decided her words displeased you, the sire said coldly. Open it, now! The overseer scrambled to comply, unlocking a container in the 3rd row. When the door swung open, a girl fell out, 16 or 17 years old, her face streaked with tears, her body shaking from hours spent in the cold, dark metal box. Maya caught her before she could hit the ground. The girl was nearly her own height, but rail-thin, malnourished, exhausted. She looked up at Maya with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. My father, she whispered. Is he? He's alive, Maya said gently. He was hurt, but he's alive. He was looking for you. The girl started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Maya held her. This stranger's daughter, who could have been any of the forgotten children Maya had known growing up. Could have been Maya herself, if things had gone just slightly differently. The sire watched them for a long moment, then turned to the overseer. You will report to the council chamber tomorrow morning. You will face judgment under the old codes for unlawful imprisonment and abuse of authority. If you run, I will personally hunt you down and ensure that you face worse than any court could deliver. The overseer's patterns went completely white, the Vorthai equivalent of bloodless terror. He nodded mutely. As they made their way back to the medical bay where Chen was being treated, Maya felt the girl, Lin, Chen's daughter, clinging to her like a lifeline. Sire walked beside them, her patterns troubled. Teacher, she said quietly, this is going to cause problems, big problems. Lord Kazith can't let this stand. He'll see it as his father undermining his authority. Then he should stop abusing his authority, Maya said, surprising herself with the sharpness in her voice. I agree, Sire said quickly. But agreement doesn't change reality. The Syndicate runs on fear and power. The The Sire is trying to change that, but change takes time. And Lord Kazith, he's not patient. They reached the medical bay to find Chen being treated by human doctors, another of the Sire's reforms. His wife was holding his uninjured hand, and when she saw Lin, she burst into fresh tears. Maya carefully guided the girl to her mother, then stepped back to give them space. The Sire stood beside her, his breathing labored, his patterns dim. "Are you well, honored elder?" Maya asked in Old Vorthai. "I am old, child," he replied quietly. "And I am dying." Maya's heart stopped. "What? I have perhaps 3 months remaining. 4, if I am fortunate." He looked at her with eyes that held centuries of wisdom and a deep, abiding sadness. "That is why I came here. Why I pushed so hard for change. I wanted to believe that my son could be redeemed before I leave this universe, that he could remember who he was meant to be. Does he know? No. And you must not tell him." The Sire's patterns flickered. "If he knew I was dying, he would simply wait for me to pass and then undo everything. But if I can make these changes take root, if I can show enough Vorthai that there is a better way, perhaps something will survive my death." Maya felt tears streaming down her face. This ancient being, this elder of stars who had lived for centuries, was spending his final months trying to save his son's soul and build a better future for people he'd never met, for humans who meant nothing to Vorthai society except as tools and servants. "What can I do?" she whispered. "How can I help?" The Sire reached out and gently touched her face, wiping away a tear with a finger that could have crushed her skull. "Keep teaching," he said softly. "Keep showing them that some things are worth preserving. Keep reminding them that memory and compassion are not weaknesses, and when I am gone," his voice grew even quieter, "be the voice that remembers, be the connection between what was and what could be. Be the bridge that I tried to build but may not live to see completed." "I'm just a technician," Maya said, her voice breaking. "I'm nobody. I can't—" "You are Maya Reeves," the Sire said firmly, "granddaughter of a woman who refused to let beauty die, teacher of the old tongue, friend to Sire, protector of Lin, voice for those who cannot speak. You are everything that my son has forgotten how to be, and you are exactly what this universe needs." He straightened with visible effort, his patterns brightening to a more normal blue. "Now come, we have a trial to prepare for tomorrow, and I intend to show my son what justice looks like when it is not twisted by power." As they left the medical bay, Maya looked back at Lin and her family, reunited, injured but alive, protected by laws that hadn't been invoked in centuries. She thought about Chen, who had worked for 17 years without complaint and been beaten for trying to find his daughter. She thought about all the other humans on the lower levels, invisible and forgotten, grinding through their lives without hope of anything better. She thought about her grandmother, teaching her words that seemed useless, preserving a language that was dead, insisting that some things mattered even when the world said they didn't. And she thought about the Sire, an ancient being spending his last months trying to teach his son a lesson in compassion that Kazith seemed determined not to learn. Maya Reeves had spent her entire life being nobody, being invisible, being too shy and too scared to speak up or stand out or make any kind of difference. But somewhere in the last 3 weeks, without quite noticing, she had become someone else, someone who taught, someone who protected, someone who stood between the powerful and the powerless and refused to move. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel strong. She didn't feel like any kind of hero. But she felt like she was honoring her grandmother's memory in a way that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough, even if it cost her everything. That night Maya couldn't sleep. She stood by her window, looking out at the stars, thinking about dying elders and broken families and languages that refused to stay dead. A soft chime came from her door. When she opened it, she found Sire standing there with 2 other young Vorthai, both females, both wearing the simple clothes of lower caste workers. "Teacher," Sire said quietly, "these are my friends, Kira and Nessa. They work in the commercial districts. They've been talking to other Vorthai their age about what you're teaching, about what the Sire is trying to do." The one called Kira stepped forward, her patterns uncertain. "We were wondering, is it true that the old tongue has words for concepts that don't exist in standard? Words about honor and duty and choosing to do right even when it costs you?" Maya looked at the 3 young Vorthai, all of them barely more than children themselves, all of them looking at her with hope and uncertainty and the desperate need to believe that the world could be better than what they'd been shown. "Yes," she said softly. My grandmother taught me that the old tongue has a phrase, keshval talor. It means the weight of choosing well. It's the idea that every choice has cost, but some costs are worth paying. Like what the Sire is doing, Nessa said quietly. He's paying a cost to try to change things. Like what you're doing, Kira added, looking at Maya. You're risking your safety to teach us, to remind us of what we've lost. Maya felt her throat tighten. I'm just trying to honor my grandmother's memory. And we're trying to honor yours, Shira said firmly. Teacher, you need to know. You're not alone. There are dozens of us, young Vorthai who are tired of the Syndicate's cruelty, who want to believe there's a better way. We're not powerful, we're not important, but we're here, and we'll stand with you, whatever comes. Whatever comes might be very bad, Maya said quietly. Lord Kazith isn't going to just let this continue. The Sire is dying. When he's gone, we'll still remember, Kira said. We'll remember the words you taught us, the ideas, the possibility that strength doesn't have to mean cruelty. Maya looked at these three young aliens who had somehow become her students, her friends, her allies in a fight she'd never chosen but couldn't walk away from. Keshaval Talor, she whispered. The weight of choosing well, Shira translated for her friends, then looked back at Maya. And we choose to remember. As the three young Vorthai left, Maya felt something settle in her chest. Not courage exactly, not confidence, but a kind of determined acceptance. She was going to see this through, wherever it led, for her grandmother, for the Sire, for Chen and Lin, and all the other forgotten humans on the lower levels, for Shira and Kira and Nessa, and every other Vorthai who wanted to believe that memory and compassion mattered more than power. The storm was coming. Lord Kazith wouldn't let his authority be challenged without response. The Syndicate wouldn't transform without a fight. And when the Sire died, Maya would lose her most powerful protector, but she wouldn't face it alone. And that, she was learning, made all the difference. The trial took place in the Grand Council chamber, the same place where Maya had first taught the old tongue, though now it felt entirely different. The tiered seating was packed with Vorthai from every level of the Syndicate, and for the first time, humans were allowed to attend. They stood in a designated section near the back. Chen among them, his arm in a cast, his face still bruised but healing. Maya sat in the front tier beside the Sire, Shira standing behind her like a guardian. The ancient Vorthai's patterns had dimmed since the incident 3 days ago, and he moved with visible difficulty, but his presence still commanded absolute attention. Lord Kazith sat opposite them, his forearms crossed, his patterns a suppressed crimson that spoke of rage held barely in check. His honor guards surrounded him, but Maya noticed something. They kept glancing at the Sire, at the crowd, at each other. Uncertainty where there should have been absolute loyalty. The overseer, who had locked Lin in the cargo container, stood in the center of the chamber, his patterns flickering through a dozen shades of fear. Beside him, looking equally terrified, was the enforcer who had beaten Chen. The Sire stood, and the chamber fell silent. We are gathered under the old codes, he began, his voice carrying despite his obvious weakness. Laws that predate the Syndicate, that predate the fall of the Empire, that represent the accumulated wisdom of 5,000 years of Vorthai civilization. These laws were built on a simple principle, that power without justice is tyranny, and tyranny cannot stand. He gestured to the two accused. These individuals stand charged with abuse of authority, unlawful imprisonment, and assault against those under their protection. Under the old codes, those who hold power are held to a higher standard, not a lower one. They are expected to protect the weak, not prey upon them. Lord Kazith stood abruptly. Father, with respect, these old codes were written for a different time, a different universe. We cannot run a modern organization using laws designed for an empire that no longer exists. Can we not? The Sire's patterns flared brighter. Tell me, my son, what principle of modern organization justifies locking a child in a cargo container overnight? What efficiency requires beating a man for looking for his daughter? What profit is gained by treating loyal workers as disposable tools? They need to know their place, Kazith growled. Without discipline, without justice, there is only the illusion of order, the Sire interrupted. You rule through fear, and fear is the most unstable foundation for any empire. The moment your people stop fearing you more than they hate you, everything collapses. He turned to address the crowd, his voice growing stronger with passion. Look around you. How many Vorthai here have attended Maya Reeves's classes? How many have learned words you thought were dead? How many have remembered traditions you believed were useless? Patterns shifted throughout the chamber. Blues and violets indicating agreement, engagement, thought. This human girl, this shy technician who spent her life invisible and forgotten, has done something that none of you accomplished in decades. She has reminded you who you are, where you came from, what you were meant to be before power corrupted your vision. He looked at his son, and his voice softened with something that might have been sorrow. I am dying, Kazith. In a few weeks, perhaps a month, I will be gone. And when I leave this universe, what will remain of me? What will remain of everything our ancestors built? Will it be your syndicate, built on fear and violence and exploitation? Or will it be something better, something worthy of the name Velnaru? The chamber erupted. In shocked murmurs, Lord Kazith's patterns went completely white, then flared blood red. You're dying? Yes. The Sire's patterns dimmed to soft blue. Acceptance. Peace. I have known for months. That is why I came here. Why I pushed so hard for change. I wanted to believe that before I died, I could help you remember what our name once meant. He turned back to the accused, and his voice hardened with authority. I find you both guilty of all charges. Under the old codes, the penalty is removal from positions of authority and restitution to those harmed. You will work the lower levels for 1 year, performing the same labor as those you abused. You will experience firsthand what it means to be powerless, forgotten, treated as disposable, and perhaps at the end of that year, you will understand why justice matters. The overseer's patterns flickered with shock and relief. The sentence was harsh but not fatal. The enforcer looked less certain, his gaze darting to Lord Kazith as if seeking rescue. None came. The Sire sat down heavily, his breathing labored. Maya reached out without thinking and took his massive hand in both of hers. The ancient Vorthai looked down at her with something that might have been gratitude. Thank you, child, he whispered in old Vorthai, for being here, for carrying what I cannot carry alone. Before Maya could respond, Lord Kazith descended from his seat, his movements deliberate and threatening. He stopped directly in front of his father, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the entire chamber. You come here after years of absence. You humiliate me in front of my people. You invoke ancient laws to undermine my authority. You threaten everything I've built, and now you tell me you're dying, as if that justifies everything you've done. The Sire met his son's gaze without flinching. I tell you I'm dying so that you understand. This is not about power, Kazith. This is not about control. This is about a father trying to save his son's soul before it's too late. My soul? Kazith's laugh was bitter and cold. You abandoned me, father. You withdrew to your meditation, your philosophy, your endless contemplation of the past while I built an actual empire. I created this. I made the Velnaru name mean something again. And now you return to tell me that everything I've accomplished is wrong? Not wrong, the Sire said quietly. Incomplete. You have power, yes. Wealth, yes. Control over a dozen systems, yes. But you have no loyalty, no genuine respect, no legacy worth leaving. When you die, my son, everything you've built will crumble because it was built on nothing but fear. He gestured to Maya. This human has been here 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And already she has accomplished something you could not in decades. She has made Vorthai want to remember, want to learn, want to believe in something beyond immediate power and profit. She has accomplished nothing, Kazith roared, his patterns blazing. She's a curiosity, a novelty. The moment you die and I remove your protection, she'll be forgotten within days. These reforms, these classes, these pathetic attempts to resurrect a dead civilization, all of it will end. And the Syndicate will return to what works, what has always worked. Power. The Sire was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, slowly, painfully, but with dignity, that age and illness could not diminish. Then let us see, he said softly. Maya Reeves, would you stand and speak? Maya's heart hammered in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent, stay small, stay invisible. That was how she'd survived her entire life, by not being noticed, by not making waves. But she thought of her grandmother, spending her final days teaching words that the world said were useless. She thought of Chen, beaten for loving his daughter. She thought of Lin, locked in darkness for speaking up. She thought of Shira and Kira and Nessa, young Vorthai who wanted to believe the universe could be better. She thought of the Sire, dying, spending his last breath trying to build something that mattered. Maya stood. She was tiny compared to the Vorthai around her. Her voice was soft, uncertain, colored by a lifetime of fear and doubt. But she spoke, and her words carried in the silent chamber. "I am nobody," she said in Standard, then switched to Old Vorthai. "I am Maya Reeves, granddaughter of Elizabeth Reeves, who taught me that some things should never be forgotten." She looked around at the assembled Vorthai, hundreds of them, powerful and dangerous and so much larger than her. "My grandmother died alone in a hospital that smelled of death. She died believing that the words she taught me were important, even though the universe told her they were useless. She died holding my hand, making me promise that I would remember, that I would never let the language die." Maya felt tears on her cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. "I didn't understand why it mattered. I was just a child who wanted her grandmother to get better, to live, to not leave me alone in a universe that didn't care whether I existed or not. But she knew something I didn't. She knew that memory is how we honor those who came before. That language is how we connect past to present. That preserving beauty in a harsh universe is the most important thing anyone can do." She turned to face Lord Kazith directly, and her voice grew stronger. "You ask what I've accomplished? I've reminded your people that they have a history worth remembering, that their ancestors built something beautiful before it fell. That tradition and honor and compassion are not weaknesses, they're the only things that make power worth having." She gestured around the chamber. "Look at them, Lord Kazith. Look at your people. They're listening, they're learning, they're remembering. Not because I'm powerful or important or special, but because I carry something they've lost and desperately want back. And when the sire dies," her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "When he dies, you can kill me. You can undo his reforms. You can return to ruling through fear and violence, but you cannot make them forget what they've remembered. You cannot erase the words I've taught them. You cannot take back the idea that there's a better way." She took a shaking breath. "That's what my grandmother gave me. Not just a language, but an idea that refuses to die. And that's what I'm giving to your people. You can silence me, but you cannot silence what I've awakened in them." The chamber was absolutely silent. Lord Kazith stared at her, his patterns cycling through colors so quickly that Maya couldn't track them all. Rage, confusion, something that might have been respect, fear, calculation. Then someone in the upper tiers stood. It was Matriarch Shalira, the old female who had been one of Maya's first students. "The teacher speaks truth," she said in Old Vorthai, her voice clear and strong. "I have remembered my mother's words because of her teaching. I have remembered what it means to be Vorthai, not just powerful, but honorable, not just strong, but wise." Another Vorthai stood, Captain Vexenal, the military officer who had challenged Maya on the first day. "I doubted her," he said. "I believed the old ways were useless, but she has shown me that efficiency without honor is just brutality with a pleasant name. I stand with the teacher." One by one, Vorthai throughout the chamber stood. Not all of them. Lord Kazith still had supporters, still had those who believed in power above all else. But dozens stood, then scores, old and young, warrior and merchant, high caste and low, and with them, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, stood Shira, and Kira, and Nessa, and dozens of young Vorthai who Maya had never met, who had learned from recordings or from friends, who had discovered that their hunger for something better than the Syndicate's cruelty wasn't weakness, but strength. The sire watched them stand, and his patterns glowed with brilliant blue light, joy and satisfaction and profound relief. He looked at his son, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "You see, Kazith, you cannot kill an idea whose time has come. You cannot silence a voice that lives in the hearts of those who choose to remember. I will die soon. Maya will not have my protection, but the changes we've started, those will endure. Because your people want them to endure." Lord Kazith stood frozen, his massive form rigid, his patterns flickering between rage and something else, something that might have been the first stirrings of understanding. "What would you have me do, father?" he asked finally, his voice hollow. "Abandon everything I've built? Pretend that power doesn't matter? Rule through, what, poetry and ancient words? Rule through respect," the sire said quietly, "through justice, through the understanding that those who follow you out of genuine loyalty are worth more than 1,000 who follow out of fear. Build an empire that your grandchildren will be proud to inherit, not ashamed to remember." He reached out and placed one massive hand on his son's shoulder. "I know you believe I abandoned you, that I chose philosophy over family, and perhaps you're right. I withdrew when I should have stayed and guided you. That is my failing, and I will carry it to my grave. But I am here now, in my final days, trying to give you something more valuable than all the credits in your vaults. I am trying to give you a legacy worth having." Lord Kazith's patterns flickered through a dozen colors, then finally settled on a deep, uncertain violet. "If I do this, if I try to change how the Syndicate operates, I will appear weak. My enemies will move against me. Other crime lords will see it as an opportunity. Let them come," the sire said simply. "Let them try. And let them discover that an empire built on loyalty and justice is far stronger than one built on fear. That Vorthai who choose to follow you are worth more than those you force into submission." He looked around at the assembled crowd, at the humans standing in the back, at Maya standing small but determined in the front tier. "You have a choice, my son. You can continue as you have been, ruling through violence until someone more violent removes you. Or you can build something better, something that will outlast you, something that honors the name Velnaru instead of soiling it." The silence stretched. Maya held her breath, acutely aware that the next few moments would determine not just her fate, but the fate of everyone on Kelthor Station who had dared to hope for something better. Finally, Lord Kazith spoke, his voice so quiet that it barely carried. "Teach me." The sire's patterns flickered with surprise. "What? Teach me." Kazith's voice grew stronger, though his patterns remained uncertain. "The old tongue, the traditions, the wisdom I've abandoned. If this human can learn it, if she can teach it to my people, then I can learn it too." He looked at his father with an expression that held pain and pride and desperate hope. "Teach me, father. Help me understand what I've forgotten." The ancient Vorthai stood silent for a long moment, and Maya saw something glisten in his eyes. Tears, glowing faintly with bioluminescence. "Yes, my son," he said in Old Vorthai. "I will teach you. We will remember together." As father and son stood facing each other, centuries of distance beginning to close, the chamber erupted in a susurrus of whispers and shifting patterns. Maya felt Shira's hand on her shoulder, felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, some grateful, some uncertain, some still hostile, but she had done it. Against every instinct, every learned behavior, every lesson that life had taught her about staying small and invisible, she had spoken. She had stood. She had refused to be silent. Her grandmother would have been proud. 6 weeks later, Maya stood in the small council chamber watching Lord Kazith struggle with his pronunciation of a particularly complex Old Vorthai phrase. The crime lord had proven to be a challenging student, intelligent but impatient, capable but stubborn, but he showed up to every lesson without fail. The sire sat in his customary seat, his patterns dimmer than they'd been the week before, his breathing labored. But he watched his son with undisguised pride, occasionally offering corrections or encouragement in a voice that grew weaker each day. They all knew he didn't have much time left. After the lesson, as Kazith left with his honor guard, the sire gestured for Maya to stay. Shira helped him to his feet, and together the three of them made their way to an observation deck that looked out over the station. "I wanted to thank you, child," the sire said in Old Vorthai, "for everything you've given me, for helping me believe that my final act in this universe mattered." Maya felt tears sting her eyes. "You've given me far more, honored elder. You've given me a purpose, a voice, the courage to speak when everything told me to stay silent." "No, child. I simply recognized what was already there." He looked out at the stars, his ancient eyes reflecting their light. "Your grandmother planted a seed. I merely helped it grow. Will he—" Maya hesitated. "Will Lord Kazith continue the reforms after you're gone? Or will everything go back to how it was?" The sire was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. My son is trying, genuinely trying to change. But old habits are powerful, and the Syndicate will resist transformation. Without me to hold them accountable." "Then we'll hold them accountable," Shira said firmly. "Teacher has shown us how. The young Vorthai, the ones who've learned, who've remembered. We won't let them forget again." "I know you won't." The sire's patterns glowed with soft blue satisfaction. "That is why I can die in peace, because I know that the bridge I built will stand even after I'm gone." He looked down at Maya, and his voice grew serious. "There will be challenges ahead, Maya Reeves. There will be those who resent you, who blame you for the changes, who see you as a threat. You will need to be strong, braver than you feel, wiser than you think you are." "I don't know if I can do that," Maya whispered. "You already have." The sire reached out and gently touched her face. "You stood in front of my son, the most powerful crime lord in the sector, and told him that his empire was built on sand. You spoke truth to power when you had every reason to stay silent. That is not the action of someone who is weak. He turned to look out at the stars again. My people have a saying, one that has been lost for so long that even I had almost forgotten it. Shankara Vilnaru. It means, the small voice that changes everything. That is what you are, Maya Reeves. That is what you will always be. And long after I am gone, long after my son has passed, your voice will echo through the generations, reminding them, teaching them, showing them that compassion and memory and courage matter more than all the power in the universe. 3 days later, the sire died peacefully in his sleep, his son sitting beside him, holding his hand and whispering words in Old Vorthai that Maya had taught him. The funeral was attended by thousands, Vorthai from across a dozen systems, crime lords and legitimate business people, old families and new dynasties. And for the first time in Syndicate history, humans were invited to attend as honored guests. Maya stood in the front row beside Sire, watching as Lord Kazith delivered the eulogy in Old Vorthai, halting, imperfect, but genuine. The crime lord's patterns were a deep purple that spoke of profound grief, and as he spoke about his father's wisdom and courage and final gift, Maya saw tears glowing on his face. After the ceremony, Kazith approached her. His patterns were subdued, almost humble. "Teacher," he said formally, "I know you have reason to fear me, reason to doubt me, but I want you to know, the reforms will continue. The classes will continue. The changes my father started will not be undone." Maya looked up at the massive Vorthai who could kill her with a thought, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there weeks ago. Respect. "Your father believed you could change," Maya said quietly. "He spent his final days proving it was possible. Don't make him wrong." Kazith's patterns flickered with something that might have been pain or determination or both. "I won't. I swear it on his memory." As he walked away, Sire leaned close and whispered, "Do you believe him?" Maya thought about the question, about Lord Kazith and the Syndicate, and all the ways that power could corrupt even the best intentions. "I believe he wants to change," she said finally. "Whether that's enough, we'll find out together." 1 year later, Maya stood in the Grand Council chamber teaching her largest class yet, nearly 200 Vorthai, with another 1,000 watching via remote feed. She'd written 3 textbooks on Old Vorthai grammar and culture, had trained a dozen other teachers, had established exchange programs with other Vorthai communities who wanted to reclaim their heritage. The lower levels of Kael'thor Station had been renovated, proper housing, fair wages, human representatives on the station council. Chen worked as a supervisor now, his daughter Lin studying engineering on a scholarship that the sire had established before his death. Lord Kazith still ran the Syndicate, still dealt in smuggling and protection, and the gray areas of galactic law, but he'd implemented codes of conduct, appeals processes, standards that his enforcers had to follow. He wasn't perfect. He still made decisions that made Maya's stomach turn, but he was trying, genuinely trying, and sometimes that was enough. After class, Maya returned to her quarters, still the same rooms she'd been given that first night, though she decorated them now with photos and mementos, making them truly hers. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a small worn book, her grandmother's journal, filled with notes on Old Vorthai grammar, translations of poetry, observations about language and memory and the things that make us human. She ran her fingers over the faded pages and whispered, "Thank you, grandmother, for teaching me, for believing that words matter, for refusing to let beauty die." A soft chime came from her door. Sire entered with Kira and Nessa, all 3 young Vorthai carrying tablets and wearing expressions of barely contained excitement. "Teacher," Sire said, her patterns bright yellow, "we've had a request. 3 more stations want to establish language programs. And the Keltharian Consortium, remember the ones who value tradition? They've asked if you'd be willing to come speak at their cultural summit." Maya looked at her students, her friends, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not pride, exactly, not satisfaction, but something deeper, something that felt like purpose fulfilled. "Then I guess we have work to do," she said, smiling. As the 4 of them bent over their tablets, planning and organizing and building something that would outlast them all, Maya thought she could feel her grandmother's presence, thought she could hear the sire's gentle voice in Old Vorthai, the small voice that changes everything. She wasn't the shy technician from Sublevel 47 anymore. She would never be that invisible, forgotten girl again, but she would always remember her, would always honor the journey that had brought her here. The grandmother who had given her words that refused to die, the ancient alien who had seen value in what everyone else dismissed as worthless. Maya Reeves, teacher, bridge builder, keeper of memory, had found her voice, and the universe would never be quite the same. The end.